All right, now is it on?
I can hear you.
Okay, something changed in the stream dashboard, so I'm guessing that it's on.
Yeah, it's on now. We're live. Finally.
Hi, Felix.
Wow, why am I so bad at this?
I ask that every
It's
day.
5 in the morning.
All right, Glab said, Gurpreet, everyone else who I've seen come through while I was fooling around trying to make this thing turn on. There is an echo though. Interesting.
Do you have the playback on, perchance?
I do not have the playback on. Well, I have it muted.
Okay.
So unless there's something else happening, which I don't yet know what there might be.
Oh, he said, wait, no, it's my fault.
Oh, okay, that makes it easy. Guys, are Tabular and Russell volume okay?
Hello.
Because I know I screw that
Hello,
up
everybody.
fairly often. Gurpreet screamed per chance, so I'm guessing that's okay. All right, is it time to introduce this?
Let's do it.
It's time. You're the
All right.
host.
So a couple of months ago, well, 2 months ago anyway, Tabular and John Peterson and Steven, the 8-Bit Warrior, and I did our little Screaming About GameMaker show where we basically talked about things that had happened in GameMaker in the last couple of years. Tabular seems a little bit low still. Let me see if I can fix that. And following that, Russell sent me a message and said that there were some things that we didn't really like cover in an I guess I forget exactly how you worded it, but it was something like there were like things that we seemed to have missed, and he wondered if we wanted to do another one with actually GameMaker and go over some of the recent happenings, and that's what we are doing now. As per usual, we have a whole list of things that we would like to hopefully go over in the next, I don't know, hour or so, depending on how much time there is. And we can talk about what's been happening, what is going to be coming up on the horizon, and we'll see what other questions people have that want to be answered. So that's where we are. Anything you two want to add?
No, thanks for setting this up. It's good to have a chat with everybody. It all turns into a very corporate thing when we try to make something, so it's good to be able to talk directly to people. So, yeah.
Meanwhile, I chose to name this Screaming to make it sound as low budget as possible on purpose.
Not low budget
Good
enough.
idea.
2 out of 10. As for hi, hello, welcome again to Screaming of GameMaker 2025, Part 2-ish. That is all.
That is all. All right, so I see someone mentioned LTS in chat. That is, I think, on the list somewhere, although I think that is one of the more straightforward items because we can see that on the roadmap. Anything in particular you two want to talk about first? GMRT is probably the one that most people would have heard of and had reason to be interested in.
I mean, we have kind of addressed it, but I feel like it is kind of great to give a quick run over and talk. GMRT. What does GMRT do differently from the current law of time? Or actually, rather, what is GMRT first? That's more important.
So GMRT is our rewrite of the toolchain and runtime component. So back when we did GMS2, we rewrote the IDE because it was in Delphi. It was a very old version of Delphi that did not, it wasn't even supported anymore. And we were getting to the point where we couldn't really rebuild the IDE easily and it worked with current Windows because they weren't updating things. It's kind of bits of Windows that we were relying on weren't working properly. They weren't working as well as they could do. It wasn't working with newer things. So we rewrote the IDE in C#. and we didn't really touch the runtime at all. So the runtime was pretty much the same. We moved some things around, and it's kind of we changed names of a few functions, things like that. But it was basically the same runtime. And GMRT is our rewrite of the runtime side of things with all the things that we've learned. So it's a new toolchain. So the toolchain is the compilers, the asset compiler, and the language compiler. And GMRT have rewritten it with all the things that we've learned across the years, and with a view to making things faster, better, and more proficient. So that's what GMRT is. It is a new runtime with new features and new things that we are looking to do.
I have been told that GMRT is specifically not GMS3, but I have occasionally called it that because people seem to understand what that means.
No, it's not GMS3. So we've tried to get away from having this GameMaker is continually changing. Okay, so having version numbers are good, but having kind of major product version is not a great idea, because the whole idea of having a major product version is that you pay for that version, and then when we have a new one, you have to pay for that one. And we've changed the model completely now so that you only have this kind of license for doing a commercial license for putting your game out commercially, and then the yearly subscription for doing console work.
Yeah.
We also seem to be moving away from the like year-month notation for updates, which I actually kind of like.
Okay,
it makes it easy to.
Yeah, that was probably a mistake this year. If we'd known that 2414 was going to take quite so long, I think we would have just decided just to keep with the it's kind of year month. I'll take that one on the chin. That was my decision. We wanted this to be at LTS by now. Obviously, that's not happened. It's taken way longer. And ideally, we should have just had it as the kind of standard kind of naming. But hey, everybody had fun, and yeah, that's my fault.
I like the year-month notation because it does make it easy to describe to people when something was added, and if they are on an old version or not.
Yeah, no, I think it's helped quite a bit. You don't have to remember random numbers and what year that actually was in and things like that. So I think that's helped across the board.
Yeah, it's not like this was added in 2.3.7. What year was that?
Yeah.
I remember when it was added. I don't remember what the number was.
There's been like a few times where I'm able to like just quickly reference like one of the release notes for a monthly update and be like, you need to be on this version for GameMaker to like get that function or this feature.
Yep.
So it is nice. It is really nice at a glance. But yeah, 2024.14 has gone on pretty too long.
Yes. Yeah. No, having said that, if you have a look at the release notes, there is so much in there. That's good now.
Yeah.
We also get criticised by people saying that we put just a little bit in and then do a release, things like that. So for those people who want big chunky releases, you're going to get one. You're going to get a huge one when this one lands.
I mean, I don't mind a big chunky release, I'll admit. Lots of goodies.
Yeah, this is true.
I feel like we should probably... Sorry, here.
No, sorry. You go.
Oh, no, I was going to just like kind of move on to the next part of the topic, but
go on.
I feel like... Alright. So GMRT has layers, particularly one of them being the compatibility layer. What is a compatibility layer?
So this is something that there have been a lot of different opinions on what it should be from people over time. how much compatibility and how much it should resemble the old versus the new runtime.
Yeah.
So how much like legacy code
GMRT
should and shouldn't still work.
Yeah, so the initial goal of GMRT is that we want to move everybody to using it. Okay, it will be the future for GameMaker, but to start off with, it is just going to be exactly the same to begin with. It will be built on different tech, but it will provide some new features, which I'll get to in a minute. But the compatibility layer is essentially, it's not a layer as such, it is a set of libraries, and those libraries implement the current runtime in terms of GMRT. Okay, now there are some changes of which we've been bringing to current runtime along the way. So things like moving away from indices and using handles for everything. In GMRT, everything is a struct, essentially, apart from the basic types of reals and integers and booleans, things like that. Everything in GMRT is a struct of some description behind the scenes, and it is then be making the changes to the current runtime so that when you move to GMRT, you're not going to have quite such a rigid shock to the system. And we've also we don't want people blaming GMRT for really problems that are in their own code, where they've been doing things that for ages we've been telling people not to do, like putting every resource as an index and index into things, because now that we've got those changes into GMRT, then we can start to do a lot more there and do a lot more changes and things like that in the background. But there's been this journey that we've got across. So the compatibility layer is essentially the current runtime rewritten in terms of GMRT and the layers it sits on. And the compatibility layer is just there so that your game, you should just be able to drop to the drop down, choose the GMRT target, and run with that one. And that will be much cleaner in those terms. We will, GMRT itself sits on top of SDL2, and it sits on top of WebGPU. So all our rendering is done through WebGPU, and all of our window handling and IO handling and things like that sits on top of SDL2. Now, what that gives us is that the SDL2 gives us all the gamepads, gives us all the keyboard, and all the handling and things like that. The SDL2, that it's kind of rich set of libraries there that allow us to handle all sorts of different gamepad inputs and things like that. And on the web GPU gives us a consistent rendering interface. We're not having to change between DirectX and Metal and OpenGL, especially since OpenGL is falling out of favor and it's on different platforms, and we can give a consistent interface, which it's a modern one that allows access to modern shaders. You get compute shaders, you get it's all the features that people have been asking for years. Kind of it's fetching textures on a vertex shader, that sort of thing. All these different things are available now within GMRT.
So there's a couple of things in there. One, I think a lot of people who've been around, their first thought with the compatibility layer is going from GameMaker Studio 1 to 2, where things like code for backgrounds and 3D stuff was basically rewritten in GML, and it sounds like this is not that. It sounds like this is actually part of the runtime libraries themselves.
Yes, exactly. We don't have any GML compatibility layer like we did in GMS2. As I said, when we did GMS2, we didn't change the runtime. Okay, we just brought things across, but we wanted to make things better, and so there were some functions which we removed, like the D3D ones. They were done in terms of D3D, not in terms of how GPUs work. Right, so and if you remember D3D back then, it was way back in 1998, 1999. There was all sorts of assumptions there about how graphics cards had worked, but not the way that GPUs were actually moving and kind of working since then. So we made changes there, and we re-implemented D3D functions in terms of those GPU ones. And that was where that library kind of came from. We have been able to change that in GMRT, because the way that GMRT works is it's not a monolithic executable. It is a bunch of libraries that a linker is then used to join together to actually create your final executable. And that final executable in it only contains the functions that you actually use. And it also means that you can keep all these things in C++ level, and so you're getting the speed out of that.
It also sounds like if you're not using a specific part of GMRT, it just won't be compiled, correct?
Yes, but there's kind of two flavors of GMRT. So we've still got a VM runner that allows us to means you don't have to go through the full compile phase of GMRT to get the final executable, because that takes longer. And when you're iterating quickly within the IDE, you want it to be as quick as possible. So there is a runner that we create that contains everything. And that's what we use from within the IDE when you use the VM version. When you create a final executable, or you build the kind of full thing that's not just the VM one, then the link phase happens. But that takes extra time, you know. So we are trying to get the balance right there. We're looking at various things. There's a bunch of live debugging things happening. The live debugging will happen with kind of VM side as well. We can load that quickly. We can compile that quickly. We can load it quickly. So these things will help you to iterate quickly, but they won't let you necessarily. It's not going to give you the speed. The speed comes from the full compilation.
So that's the primary difference. I actually wasn't sure about that either.
Yeah, it's kind of the VM version basically compiles down to our bytecode, which is a modified one. We've learned a lot over the last 15 years around what works best on the kind of VM side of things. And so the bytecode version has actually very few instructions these days. Last I checked, it was about 55 to 60 instructions that we actually have now. And they work on much simpler elements. The full compilation uses that bit, the kind of VM compilation, and turns that into LLVM IR for the intermediate representation, and then that's compiled further down. So we're always creating native executables for a final game.
I did want to ask something which isn't really on the doc, but this is about GMRT. Regarding the indexes, you know, people going through indexes with assets and whatnot, I did kind of wonder, there are some libraries and resources that do indexing, which there are functions for that nowadays. We have asset get IDs, great function. But as far as I'm aware, that still doesn't do that for built-in functions. I'm wondering, would we ever get any kind of like middle ground compatibility for that?
Say that again, Tab?
So, like, a way to iterate over every single built-in function, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, you should be able to do asset get IDs for just scripts, and then it should give you everything from the script. That should give you every script that's in the system.
There. Right, but I'm talking about the built-in library.
Oh, the built-in library. Well, that varies a lot. You can do, if you do, you can do ref script and then the name of the function and do handle parse on it, and it will give you back the handle for that. So you can do that.
I guess the nuclear option would be to include the like f names or GML spec or whatever the file is called in your game, and just parse that.
Yes. Yes, you can do that. That's a nuclear option. Very much a nuclear option, yes.
I suppose, yeah. Those are both indeed options. No, I only just mostly ask because I know some people prefer to take the least hacky way if they can, which is understandable.
The way that's least likely to
Yes,
break in a
but
random GameMaker update when something internal changes.
yeah, but no, handle parse will allow you to do that, and we're not. GMRT does not necessarily have access to the name of every function that is internal to it. So that's one of the reasons why we don't allow you to get all of the built-in functions. And also there's very little difference between, in GMRT, there's very little difference between a built-in function and just every C++ function that's in the actual thing, because we compile everything down to a C++ function. So the difference is a bit more nuanced there. So there's a few reasons why we don't really want to do that. So
I was going to ask
Yeah.
what on earth you're doing that you need to iterate over every built-in function, and then I saw Yellow Afterlife say that GM Live needs to do it in order to like identify live changes to the code. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I do something similar on my end in some of my projects. Not the end of the world, it's just...
but as I say, it's something that we shy away from because that's essentially debug information. You start to give more vectors for attack on sort of various areas, and I've actually spent quite a bit of time over the last few weeks doing security bug fixes and things like that to stop sort of various attack surfaces and different things. As part of against the WebAssembly conversion.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm scrolling up trying to get caught up on chat on things that I missed when I was fooling around trying to fix things.
Yeah, same here.
I think Russell has gone over all of the questions about GMRT that I've seen scrolling past. Let's see, what else is there on the list? So, I haven't seen anyone ask this in the stream chat yet, but I know that this comes up pretty often too. So, this is sort of related to the concept of the compatibility layer. GML version 2 and GML version 3 gets thrown around a lot. I've been following the progress, or the suggested progress anyway, with GML3 in like the Discord and stuff. I'm curious what the status of that is right now. So this is going to be a slightly different looking version of GML than the one we're used to, where things are organized into a more object-oriented sort of paradigm than what we have now. But should we get into that while we're here?
Yeah, it's GMRT is designed to be language agnostic. Okay, so we have designed GMRT such that we can interface between languages. So we have it set up simply. So essentially, there is what we've called an extension up till now doesn't really exist inside GMRT because GMRT is modular. We have these libraries that contain functions and we can link things together. You can provide these libraries in different languages. So that breaks down a barrier naturally to start off with, as long as they are linkable in that way. Because we have a description, so essentially we have a description file for a library, and that says whether or not how does a function look to GML, so that we can do a show debug message, and that takes these parameters, and that then described in terms of GML, and then what function to call, what C function to call when GML calls that. And that is given a signature and is given a way of calling it. So we actually generate all that glue code. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One of them is consistency, so that we can change interfaces and how things actually work behind the scenes very quickly. Previously, on the current runtime, all of these are handcrafted. They're all created it's kind of once. And there's been a couple of times where we've wanted to change the interface because it would be faster, and we've not been able to, just basically because there's 4,500 functions in GameMaker, and we'd have to change every single signature. That doesn't really work well. So in GMRT, we've changed it now that we have a description. It's called an interface description language, and that describes how we are going to call a GML function and how it's implemented. The great thing about this is we can now generate the glue code that's required to call from C++ to GML, from GML to C++, to C# to JavaScript and all sorts of different things. We can now generate all those signatures very easily. So it means that we've now got a vector in which we can bring other languages into GameMaker relatively simply.
The fun thing about programming languages is that they're really just an abstraction on top of instructions to the computer. So if they know how to talk to each other, then in theory they should just be able to work together. It's not like there's such thing as a dedicated C program or a dedicated JavaScript program or anything, as long as one knows that the other expects a function with certain inputs that it can provide.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of one of the great things as well is that we can set up rules on how these type interactions happen as well. So when I go from GML to C++ and I pass in a string, what happens at the C++ end? And we can change those rules. If we decide that it's faster to do it this way, then we can change that. The other great thing is that when we're writing these functions now, we only need to write the C++ end of it. We only need to write the bit that actually does the work. We're not writing all the other glue bits of code around it. And if we want to introduce a new error message and things like that, then we can do it just by changing the tool, which generates all these things, and we can improve it kind of quickly. Whereas before, we'd have had to go through every function that actually does this sort of thing and make sure that it's not doing something weird with types and things like that. And we could get a much more consistent interface.
I saw someone a minute ago say Rust in GameMaker when, and this is about the time where I expect everyone to shout out the preferred language that they would like to use in GMRT.
We plan on publishing a lot of this stuff so that anybody who loves their favorite language, they can put things in. This is also one of the reasons why CE2 in GameMaker is taking so long, because one of its core things is that it has an LSP in there, and the LSP is there so that you can use different languages and do different things. So somebody's asking Rust bindings when you make them. Okay, so that's it's cool. When GMRT is out fully, we will have a description of what the IDL is, and you can create your own tool to do do your Rust bindings, because I don't use Rust and I've got no idea what we have to do.
Totally fair. On that note, Dragonite, I'm gonna add in duck language just for you.
Great. I don't know what that means, but it has the word duck in it, so I'm sure it's gonna be great.
It'll only have the word duck. That's it.
Yeah, there'll just be quacks of varying length for the different keywords and symbols.
Yeah. So
I like that better.
The original question, though, I think was about GML v3. So where are we with that? So
well, it sort of blends together, doesn't it? Because GML2 and GML3 are sort of different languages in the same way that GML3 and JavaScript are.
Yes, exactly.
To the runtime.
So what I see GML v3 is it is us handing back the keys to GML back to the community to a certain extent to go, what do you want in GML? Okay, to date, Mark Overmars was the originator of GML. I kind of took it over as being the nursemaid essentially, and I have tried to bring more modern practices to GML. I'm handing it over now to the community in terms of what do you actually want, and the new compiler for GMRT is set up in a much better way for us to be able to modify that and integrate more modern kind of language concepts, things like closures and that sort of thing. They're all perfectly possible now. We already have them inside our JavaScript compiler because it needs that. So it's all possible. My only thing about GML is it's a learning language. It shouldn't have too many things in there that are unexpected. And so I'm still going to weigh in on things and give my opinion, but I'm not going to be the gating factor in a lot of these things now going forward. So nothing's implemented. Everything's on the table just now. It's something for the future. It's not going to happen until next year at the earliest before we get started on changing things. But it will be a compiler option. It will basically be this source file is GML v3 rather than GML standard or whatever we call it just now. And it will just be an option. And it will just be currently in GMRT, when we have different languages, we don't care when we're calling things. They're all so it's not like the whole game has to be in JavaScript or the whole game has to be in GML, or you can mix and match. We can call between any language, and the marshalling of arguments and return types and things like that all happen in the background. There's a cost to it, so crossing between the GML boundary and the C# boundary has about the same cost as going between C++ and C#. So there is a cost, but it's kind of relatively small. And anytime you use C#, of course, then you are using the C# runtime as well. So there is an overhead penalty on that too, because it has its own garbage collection, which happens alongside the kind of GameMaker garbage collection as well.
Off the top of my head, I seem to remember that when you set up a code file to work with JavaScript, there's just like a little drop down that says which language to set it to, the same way that right now there's, like when you're using a shader, there's a drop down for GLSL versus HLSL, right?
Yes, that'll be pretty much the same sort of thing, but there'll be you know how currently it comes up and asks you, you want to use GML or GML Visual? There'll be a dialogue like that for the project, which basically says, okay, what's your default language for this project? You want it to be JavaScript, but you're not going to have to think, oh, the prefabs that I'm using, what language are they in? You don't care what language they are. No, right? No. You can use Scribble written in it's kind of GML v2 if you want, or you can use any of the other kind of current things, because you're not going to care whether or not, even if you're on C# and kind of making your game in C#, you don't really care what the prefabs are actually made in, because you'll still be able to call between them and you won't really care.
I remember way back when there was talk of first class versus second class languages, that being that JavaScript and GML would be able to be written directly into code files and just work, whereas other languages would probably need some like extra like bridging between GameMaker and code files written in them. Is that still the case? Or is
the first class versus a first class language, all I mean by a first class language is that you'll be able to use them in events. Okay, so currently the way we've done it just now, events, we could really only use JavaScript and GML. There's been some promising work done on C# where we would actually be able to use C# for doing events. Now, the reason here is that the that the event model within GameMaker is slightly different from how other languages represent things, and the mapping's not necessarily the same. So, for example, in GameMaker generally, an event, you're not thinking about that as a function, right? But in reality, that is actually a function that's getting created for your event, and then your code is put inside that. It just feels like it's a bit of code on its own. It's not a function. In reality, it is, but you're not thinking that way. Other languages don't have that as a way of representing things, so it would look odd. So, like, what does a C# event actually look like? Because it's not part of a class. It's not got the same visibility of things within C#. So it doesn't make much sense, at least not to me. It would look odd for somebody coming from C# land to GameMaker land and going, oh, I could write this stuff. It's probably easier if we just put it in so that, yeah, you could call directly from that event out to your C# code if you want, and we might have a mapping that says obj player maps to the C# class as kind of object player or something like that, and then whenever you put a function call in, it will call a method on that class. Yeah, so we may well have things like that we actually set up, but then that would look different inside the GameMaker editor. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of these things are just the mental mappings as to what you'd actually do with different functions. So when I say first class, I mean you would just write JavaScript or GML there. I think that works for JavaScript because you're used to, within JavaScript, writing a code fragment on a particular HTML tag, that sort of thing, to just be run. It's kind of when this is pressed, for example. People are used to that. So that kind of works for events, but from C# land, does a GameMaker event system work the same way? I think it's easier for us to bypass that a little bit and just say, no, just you can create in C# inside scripts because that maps better to a C#.cs file, whereas the event ones, yeah, no, it's a little bit more woolly as to what you could actually reference and things like that easily. So it's just the class semantics which are the problem. Similarly for C++, as to how that would work.
So it sounds like it's closer together than I thought, but there's still some complicating bits there. I guess that leads into another question that's come up on occasion, which is that will you be able to just write like a method inside a struct called step or like draw or something like that and expect it to work like an event?
It is something that, I mean, this is where we start to move for GMRT. Compatibility library is just the start. Okay, as we make new things, we are going to be adding them in different ways. So kind of going forward, when we're adding something from now, we're not adding it to the current runtime. We're adding it to GMRT. Okay, so there will be a breaking point coming up for it's all the features that we have just now in LTS. They will carry on to being supported in current runtime. Anything new that we add, for example, there's going to be new room editor, and some of them that will have new features, for example, triggers, trigger areas and things like that. We are not planning on adding them to the current runtime. You'll have to be on GMRT to use them. Okay, you'll be able to lay them out, and but they'll not be available to you inside current runtime. You'd have to use GMRT to go in and do it. So we are looking to current runtime will, much the same way as GMS 1.x did, it will be unsupported at some point in the future, which I've got no dates yet as to when that's going to be, but yeah.
So
kind of lost my train of thought there.
Basically, it's still up in the air and definitely probably a whiles away.
Yes, yeah. So nothing to announce there at the moment, but new features will just be coming to GMRT. One of the great things for us about GMRT is we're not having to maintain multiple compilers or multiple actual runtimes. currently we have to support C++ and JavaScript kind of runtimes, and that's very problematic to us. Every time we add a new feature, we have to add it twice. Every time when we add a language feature, for instance, I've got to go and change 3 different compilers for the VM, YYC, and HTML5 one. Going forward with GMRT, we write the code once, we add a language feature once, and that will make us much more productive.
I remember since basically as long as I've been using GameMaker, people have been asking to be able to just write code directly in object events, and then GMS2 came out, and that was something we were allowed to do. And then all of 5 minutes after that happened, people started asking to be able to just like write a function called like step or create or whatever, and have that work instead of actually having to click on the event name.
Yeah, ideally, going forward, we would want that to happen. The event model that in the background, we basically root. There is a function created for you called, which is your object name underbar step underbar 0, 1, or 2. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but and we match that to the step event, so that when the step event happens, it routes it through to that function. That is happening in the background. The mechanism that we have going forward, and it might well be a GMLv3 thing, where we just change it so that you go, look, if you have something called onStep, I hate that name myself, but
the Unity way of naming
some
things.
Name. Yeah. If we have something to a known name, then that will get called and automatically hooked up. When you inherit from an object or something like that. But that will be a GMLv3 way of doing it. It's not the GMLv2 way of doing it.
I do think that would probably be mostly something that appeals to veterans, and the beginners would probably prefer having like explicit events, because it looks more like their mental model of how the game works in the head. But
I believe so. I think that's one of the secret sauce in GameMaker, is the fact that for beginners, it has this very visual way of going into things, to be able to say, I want to add an event. Oh, I can add all these things, and you get this huge list of things. And that irritates veterans, because they know what they want, and they want to do it succinctly and quickly and add it in. So I do see it as being something that a veteran would probably use, but a beginner wouldn't.
Is Tabular still here? Did we lose him? Did he have to
no,
go do
I've been wanting to like speak, but it's been kind of going on for the past moment or so. So I was like letting the train run. Also, I was reading chat.
Anything anything you want to add to the GML3 or compatibility or anything?
Well, I did want to go on about one of the other topic points involving it, which technically has kind of been answered for the most part, which is old tutorial materials that work in GMRT/GML3. But there is some dot points in there which we didn't really cross over a little bit earlier. In the beta especially, and some of the older monthly versions, we have a section in the main game options called compatibility, or deprecated behaviors. Could we go on about that?
In what sense?
You have to remind me exactly
which behaviors are.
You'd have to remind me.
Yeah, like the collision compatibility mode, the hide audio errors, legacy JSON and number conversion, other behavior, instant change and position change, a copy on write for arrays.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. These are all things that we do not want to support in GMRT going forward. Anything which is in that section, that's specifically why we added this section. Internally, we've just been kind of going, okay, what things don't we want to support at all? Instance change is a big headache to us. The fact that you can immediately take an object and go, hey, I'm just going to pretend to be something else. I'm just a struct with a bag of data in it, and I'm going to suddenly become a different behavior and things like that. That's actually really problematic. It means that we can't do any static analysis on what this is because it's not static, it's completely dynamic. And that is an issue. And the very fact that you can do this on anything at any time, there's no language feature there which allows us to go, this is fixed. So declare this thing as being, it's not going to change. The fact that you could just do that at any point is problematic. So there's a bunch of deprecated behaviors in there that they're much like, I think in GMS 1, we had a bunch of compatibility things that we left in so that, collision changes and things like that, where we changed how things were actually working for the better. But there were still some games which required the old behavior because they exploited it in some way. So if you could consider those deprecated behaviors, they're all things that we do not want to support in GMRT because they're problematic in some way. They either box us into a corner, so we can't change physics systems easily, or they box us into a corner that we can't do various optimizations that we'd like to be able to do. That sort of thing. So that's basically why they're there. If people have problems with that, they need to shout out about it, just because it's the sort of thing where we may change things kind of going forward.
Is it still true that there's like special code in the runner that will make things like the old view angle, view X view, view W port features from really old GameMaker work? I think it was John Peterson, said he ran into that by accident one day and was surprised that it was still there.
Probably because there is a reticence for us to actually delete huge swathes of code. It's because Fritz does like going through and removing things. He may have done that already, but there are old code in there for handling sort of various components like that. We only recently took out a whole lot of the old room rendering because we still had some people relying on things. I mean, we are still supported. There are still releases of things like Rivals of Aether, and no, that's been going for a long, long time, and they have not updated. And we occasionally have to go back and support very old games that still have an audience. So we're yeah, and I know there's a lot of things that we're not actually able to just get rid of things completely because they still crop up.
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of really good games that are still either getting updates or still have some level of maintenance that's going on that do need some bit of compatibility support.
I do wonder how many games like that are actually on 2024 13 or at least something relatively recent versus how many have decided to plant themselves on 2022 LTS and just stay there.
Well, before we do answer that, I do know for sure there's at least one game that is consistently getting updated, but I can't get that from the top of my head.
It's a
can't remember.
Pretty wide umbrella of things that can be, Tabular.
I mean, yeah, I know, but I feel like I recall. You know what? It's fine. It'll come back. I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll come back 10 seconds after we go offline.
Yeah. Just so everybody is aware, it's LTS 2022. We aren't going to be making any more updates. We still support it for some various games that are commercially available that are still kind of using it. So we do still update it. For us, though, that game is now. That code base is effectively 3 or 4 years old. And it's like going back in time, essentially looking back at it because it does things quite differently in various areas. And we will keep that LTS 2022 install. You'll be able to have that installed for as long as you want. The new LTS coming out will be a new install. It will be a different installation. It'll be LTS 2026. It will be supported for it's kind of 2 years. That's kind of our horizon for that one, and it will be we will be updating that. We're also going to be pointing at, we are not going to have monthlies the same way, so we will be using that as our main download. You would encourage tutorial authors and things like that to be making their tutorials and templates and anything like that you're delivering would be delivered against LTS 2026. We won't be distributing. No, we're not. Any LTS that we've got on our download will be pointed to LTS 26. Anything, the LTS 2022 will still be available, but it'll only be on the releases it's kind of website and things like that, so that you can still download the old version and get access to that. But we won't be updating SDKs and things like that unless you come speaking to us specifically, because publicly we're not going to be updating it at all.
It sounds like, for the most part, 2024-14 is going to have the same feature set as LTS. LTS is just going to have basically every last bug fix that is found and feasible to fix before then.
Yeah, that's exactly what. That's one of the reasons 24-14 is taking so long, because there's certain features that we want to get in definitively, so that LTS 2026 has all of those in there. It is it has all of the things that we're wanting to go forward. And the main things that we're doing, the plugin support, so that we can deliver new IDE features without having to do a full IDE release, and prefabs, where initially we'll be making prefabs, but it has all the support that we need. That's taken a little bit longer than we thought, because as we've been making them, we've discovered things that we want to be able to do that you can't do just now. So we are fixing those at the moment. That's one of the main reasons why it's taking longer. The plugins and the prefabs, and there are our red lines. We wanted to get them in before LTS so that we weren't continually changing project formats. We weren't continually changing sort of various components once LTS had gone out. We've learned our lesson from LTS 2022, and that we don't want to have those things changing massively, because the last thing a project wants is giant changes in the project format that they're going into their Git repository and things like that. So a lot of the work we've done over the last few years have been to make that easier. Project tools helped, and that it's easier now to go between different formats. It makes it simpler in some ways. It's made some of our lives a bit more complicated, and it's some parts we've learned lessons from that too. Yeah, that's the idea. LTS 2026 will be based on 24-14. There's no new features. Once we release 24-14, there'll be about 2 months, and then we'll be ready to release LTS 26. We're not going to do that. If we're ready sometime in November, we might release it. I suspect not, though, just because we all start to go off for Christmas, sort of mid-December onwards, and we don't want to release something and then there'd be a big problem, and we have to roll things back a little bit. We'd rather just do it in January, and everybody's around.
There's usually a saying that, like, you never want to push like a whole commit or release on Friday and then come back like a week later.
Christmas is like the Friday of the whole year, isn't it?
Exactly, yes. Exactly. Yeah, and plus, most people are off on like Christmas. There are very few people come in between Christmas and New Year, so we really don't want to be trying to support everybody, especially since we also find that a whole lot of people across the Christmas holidays, they have some time. They go away, make some games and things like that. They go and play with things. So actually, we find it's kind of GameMaker getting used quite a bit across that time period as well. So.
Every year, I see a not huge, but statistically relevant bump in my YouTube traffic around then, and also around June when kids are getting out of school. Let's see. I think we've covered most of GMRT and GML3. Should we take that note about prefabs and start running with it? Because what exactly prefabs are, what you do with them, and possibly most importantly, what's going on with the marketplace is also a fairly common question.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with what are prefabs.
Unless there's anything remaining about GMRT that I forgot about.
No, I think we got it all covered.
Ready to move on?
Cool. Yep. I can answer the question. What is a prefab? Simply put, a prefab is just a GameMaker project that contains assets, and you can reference that so you can reference a prefab from your project, and everything that is inside that prefab is available to your project to use. So you can drag and drop things into the room editor, you can reference scripts and macros and anything like that, so that you can actually utilize that prefab inside your project. So it is like a library. It's a library of assets. It's a library of scripts. Those assets can include objects. It's the only restriction that we've got is that rooms don't really make sense. Okay.
Because they depend on so many other things.
It kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's because you don't use bits of rooms. You only either use whole rooms or not, and then you'd make that room yourself within your. So it doesn't really make sense. There isn't really a restriction on it. At the moment, we've kind of got an artificial. You shouldn't put a room in a prefab right now, but we haven't got a really good use case for a room inside a prefab. It's usually just all the other things. So we are starting to experiment right now with kind of GUI components. We've got inventory things as well to show people how to actually use these. And the inventory uses the kind of UI layers and things like that too. So it's very simply put, a prefab is just another project you can reference. You can have your own prefabs that are available. Prefabs come through our package management system. That's based on NPM, so you can actually have your own server. You can actually, not just now within Package Manager, you can go in and create, have your own server and have kind of components available, and you can download those. At the moment, we are working out how to build prefabs. So there's nothing here that is secret as such. There are lots of unanswered questions just now that we are gradually answering ourselves. And as soon as we've got all the rules sorted out and things like that, we will tell everybody. That's probably going to be this year. It's going to be after LTS 26 goes out, but we are making components and finding all the questions out that you're going to ask pretty soon after we give you the ability. We'd rather have the answers rather than saying to you, we don't know, we're still working it out ourselves.
I think what most people are imagining is something that's a lot like local packages right now, where you, like, say, create local package and then you can drag the assets that you want into it. But really, I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, so really, it would be a bit like that, but and in fact, the interface we're using right now is basically the same thing. When we're creating a prefab at the moment, it's pretty much the same thing. We're using that marketplace interface to actually export the prefab, but we want something nicer than that eventually. but that essentially they're just like libraries of assets that you can use. The great thing is that a prefab can depend on another prefab, which can depend on another one, and so on. So you can have this chain of dependencies on particular prefabs. The way that we're finding it getting used at the moment is that we have prefabs of pure assets that are images, that are sounds, that are paths and things like that, things that are kind of leaf ones. And then we have behavioral ones, like our inventory one, and that refers to, as part of their initial setup, statics of setup, they refer to assets within the other prefabs that are the asset ones. So for sprites and things like that. There's some complications because sprite, now that's one of the things we've been discussing this week. So there are some times when you want a sprite, but you want to have a different origin for that sprite. It's the same pixels, but it's you're wanting to override the origin on it, or you want to override the collision, or you want that sprite, but I want it as a 9-slice, and things like that. Now, before you would do that within your project, you would just duplicate it in, but we want the prefab system to allow you to just say, I want to refer to that sprite and I want to use its different things. So there are different things, that behaviors that we want to be able to have so that you're not having to duplicate too many things in, which means if a sprite prefab is updated, you will inherit those updates. You'll inherit the good things and override the behaviors that you actually want. There's a downside to that because you might actually, the original author may go and completely change something. So, but then you would be able to use the previous version of the prefab and duplicate in that sprite into your project to use it as you wish. But I'm envisaging a scenario whereby a studio could actually have a collection of libraries that give the studio logo and things like that. I mean, the studio logo changes, they just change that one prefab, and then suddenly when they rebuild their games, they'll all have the new studio logo in.
Or like the copyright date changes or something like that.
Yeah, that sort of thing, or like their studio video or something like that. You can put included files into these things and inherit them and stuff like that as well. So we're just trying to make things much more flexible, and where you have a library system so that you're no longer will you have to import your marketplace asset into your project, and if that ever updates, you've got to go away and find it. You would be able to just update the prefab, tell all your all the people who have it to get the latest version, and you'll be able to update them easily, and they'll all get the changes rather than problematically having to explain to them why they haven't imported it properly.
Or I suppose probably the point of contact for most people would be something like Scribble if you're using that in various different projects. You update Scribble once and it's automatically reflected in wherever you're using it.
Yes, yeah, and your prefab has a version number, and it's I can't remember the phrase that to it. It's basically you would no, it's the same versioning system as NPM. So you would be able to have a version 1.2, say, and if you have a minor update, that would be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. You'd be able to say, I want the latest version of 1.2 of this prefab, and it will automatically update when they do a minor version update. But if they do a version 1.3, you won't get that, okay? But similarly, if they went to a version 2 version, you wouldn't go to that. Or you could say, I just want the latest version of Scribble. I don't care what version it is. If you ever updates that, it would automatically get the latest version. Whereas if you wanted to stick on a particular version number, you could say that, and it wouldn't update at all.
Something like the package lock file or whatever Node calls it. I can't remember.
Yeah, package lock. On that note, actually,
I guess the last question would be what's happening to the marketplace, but I still have no idea if there even is an answer to that because it's been so long.
Yeah.
Currently, the way that we're thinking is all of our prefabs are going to be free. Okay, it is up to you how you want to have access to any prefab server that you put up that would serve GameMaker prefabs. So I could see some enterprising people doing something there where they're selling access to those things. That's up to them. We and the wider Opera are kind of looking at having a server whereby there'll be a login to it, which will be your Yo-Yo account, and you will be able to download things through that you have purchased. But that is not, that's kind of where we're heading for the marketplace. It will all be prefabs. There will be a public one, which is all completely free, and there'll be a private one where you gain access to things. But I'm not saying when that's going to be available, but that's kind of where we are.
That does
You
make
can
it
have
sound
your
like
own.
it's still a long way off.
Well, it's we're trying to get 24. Our focus is on get 24.14 and LTS 26 out. So no, it's mainly just that we're not focused on it at all. So
Yeah. All right. I feel like it's a good time to move on to our next topic at hand. IDE plugins. What are they? As a
IDE
concept.
plugins are new UI, new UI and code that you can inject into the IDE. The IDE has always been built with this in mind. Basically, everything that we have is a plugin. The issue that we've got here is that all the code that we've got relies on each other. There isn't a whole lot of assumptions built into it, but we can't easily separate one plugin from another. Particularly, this is in terms of resource types. The room editor is full of, if it's this resource, do this, if it's that resource, do that, rather than saying, here is a resource interface and go away and record and do this action on that. And we're having to unpick all of that code at the moment. And that's where a lot of the time goes. So long and the short of it, IDE plugin is new UI, new code for the IDE that is loaded dynamically at startup. And there's been various things that people have done in the past. I know that Zach, who's now on the team, I know that he did, the original Feather was actually built by him investigating how the IDE was actually built, and he came to us basically with it all essentially working within his own kind of DLL that he'd created and things like that. And an IDE plugin will be able to do these things. There's a whole lot of nuance to that in terms of what you can actually do, and a lot of it does rely on hook points that we have to build into the IDE itself so that you can actually hook onto those things. So it's a more nuanced question than you realize, but essentially it's you will be able to give a C# DLL and it will be loaded as part of the as the startup, and it will be part of the IDE after that.
I remember maybe a year ago or so, Zach said something to me about like the various editors, like Sprite Editor, that sort of thing, being extracted from the main IDE executable and turned into a plugin.
Yes, there is an IDE core, and we have been slowly over the last year and a half to 2 years taking everything out of IDE core and put them into plugins, into separated plugins. There is a nest of dependencies in there, and we've been unpicking that nest for most of those 2 years, and that has been a slowdown kind of for us doing that. But you need it for users to be able to add a plugin and to do it's going to change the workflow of the IDE.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of actually does swing onto our next topic. Regarding plugins, would we actually have a proper like dedicated API for all the plugins? Or is it
I
gonna be
assume
like the
it'll be
Wild West?
documented somewhere, somehow. It's just a question of how much freedom it would give you to actually do whatever you want.
Yes, exactly. There is aspirations to what we want to have, but then there's realities as to what we can actually deliver in what sort of time frame. So we are planning on open sourcing components of the IDE so that you can see this is how this happens, this is how that works, this is what's going on here, so that you have access to those things. So we're also delivering plugins via the package manager and things like that as well. So the package managers are going to end up being a kind of focus for a lot of these things.
Yeah. That would all tie in with the package manager. Yeah, wouldn't it?
I'm looking at what's on there now. So the IDE updater is on the package manager. The project tool is on there.
Yeah.
CE2, I
It's
think
basically
itself
any
is
component.
not, but it sounds like it will be at some point. Unless
Yeah,
it is, and I
basically
just didn't notice it.
any component that we want to update separately is all part of package manager. One of the goals in 24.14 is to get to the point where CE2 can become put into the package manager so that we can update it. Between 24.14 and release, we actually have a plan, sorry, LTS release. Then we want to be able to have at least one CE2 release that happens through the package manager so that we can test things and watch it fail spectacularly for the reasons that we do not know at the moment, because we're trying to avoid them, but I'm sure it will. I'm sure there'll be some reason why it won't work.
Going on back to IDE plugins, I know some people have already even actually gone as far as making it like a feature request or like an issue on it on the GameMaker bugs repo, but custom asset types, would it be possible to make custom asset types?
I know that
under the IDE plugin.
Like the ASCII compiler for GMRT is supposed to be a lot more open.
Yeah, okay. For current runtime, no. For GMRT, that is where we're heading. Okay, so that's where we want to be in GMRT. We want you to be able. But I've talked about this at various shows and various discussions and things like that. But essentially, where I want to go with GMRT is just now every event that we support is a runtime event. I want to introduce new types of events. So for example, you would be able to create an object and it would have a design time event. That design time event would execute when you're inside the room editor or something. So you would be able to create your object code. You would actually add your object in there and it would get a step event inside the room editor. It would also get a draw event inside the room editor, so that the draw event, you would be able to draw things that will be shown inside its kind of room editor, such as if you had an enemy, you could show the view cone that it actually has, so that it would be able to trigger, if it saw anything in this cone shape, then that means that it's going to activate the AI or something like that. So you would be able to craft your object in such a way that it can react to things within the room editor. You'd be able to add code to if the mouse clicked on it or right-clicked on it. If you moved it, you could have a bunch of things that you could actually do, but that would only execute in design time. So you'd be able to edit that code immediately, and then it would run inside the room editor. GMRT allows us to do these things because we can compile things in the background and we can execute that code within the IDE. Similarly, in the future, and this is an aspiration, I'm going to prefix this with, this is kind of the idea of where we want to head. such that you could also have, for example, server-side events, whereby in your game you could actually say, this code is going to execute when the game is exported as a server, and it is part of the game code, but it's not all of the game events. So it doesn't have the draw or anything like that. You're not going to draw it on the server. You're only going to handle server-side step events and creation things and on-connection events and things like that that you would actually have. But it allows us to keep the events local to where they're actually going to execute, and you can do different things within there. I mean, you could just as easily have inside your design time event calling a method which is shared with the actual runtime side as well, and you could write that code once without necessarily kind of going. But that's the sort of thing that we are looking to do within GMRT to make it much more flexible and to do much more than we could with the current runtime.
I've been playing around with Unity editor scripting for various things in the last few months, and you can fairly easily do things like draw lines between objects that are related in some way, and I keep thinking that would be nice to have in GameMaker. If you have like a door with a key, it would be nice to be able to draw like a line from the key to the door that it unlocks or something like that.
Yeah, and you'd be able to do all those sorts of things using this sort of system, and that's where we're heading with this, with kind of GMRT being much more capable of kind of running these areas.
Speaking of, this is a question more appropriate for you, Dragon Knight, to ask.
Uh-oh.
It's under IDE plugins, just under asset types.
Oh, yeah, I did write that down, didn't I? Would people be able to make a 3D room editor?
Yes, you would be able to do whatever you wanted. You would have access to C#, you would be able to do things. In principle, yes. The one type of events that I was actually talking about, for an asset type, you want to be able to compile time events as well. So, sorry, I didn't quite get there with what I was doing previously, what was said previously. So you would need some sort of compile type event. What do I do with this asset type when I am packaging it for runtime? So that my runtime component might have a distilled, filtered version of what this asset type actually is. And so, we would have to support. So that these ideas came from when we have to put in a spine asset. Okay, we have to package it. We have an IDE component. We have a design time component. We have a compile time component. The asset compiler needs to understand various bits and how to actually package it. And we also have the runtime side of that. And we are looking to support it such that spine doesn't become something that we have to support all the time, but we could actually publish the source to here is all the components that you actually need, so that when spine updates things, we're not having to do it every single time, because that is a big bind to us. At the moment, we have to do it over to run 3 different runtimes, because we've got to do the C# one, the C++ one, and the TypeScript one, which gets converted to JavaScript, and then we use that. It is a big bind to us to actually update spine. It's one of the reasons that we don't like doing it. It always introduces instability. There's always all sorts of edge things. Their runtimes aren't perfect, and we have to go through and test that everything's still working properly. There's a whole bunch of issues around about that. So we'd like to get to the point where we're not just supporting spine, we're supporting other Spriter and things like that do similar jobs, and some say are better, for various workloads and things like that, but we're definitely not supporting those in the current system because it's way too much overhead. We'd just be spending all our time updating these things.
It kind of makes me think of the like IDE build scripts, the batch scripts, but in this case, instead of being project-wide, it would be per asset.
Yes, yeah, no, the current batch scripts at compile time are really just yes, we can have a hook point in here that you could do something, and it helped us support textures, sort of GPU textures and things like that.
I remember it was added for, I think, some
extension,
extension, but I can't remember which one now.
Internally, we needed it for the GPU textures and things like that. So that was kind of our driving force for that, because we really wanted to have that as part of current runtime going forward as well. So, but ideally, we have better mechanisms within GMRT. You have access to the build graph, where the build graph is how various tools are invoked as part of the build process, and you can go in and change that, things like that. But we'll be documenting that as time goes on, so that you can all see various ways in which you can modify the compile process.
I think we have most of the questions answered for IDE plugins, don't we?
I think so.
Yeah. Like, literally the last
I did see then nothing happened with, I believe is Orca's YouTube name on the Discord, say, how does updating bits and pieces fit in with LTS's whole no feature updates deal? So...
you don't need to update the package if you don't want to.
So it's just as simple as you just ignore it.
Yeah, if you don't want it.
All right.
That's,
I was wondering if
onto the user.
Yeah,
I feel like it. I guess like I feel like the question was like more so because like with LTS like it doesn't get any new features at all, but like the ID package manager and all that's kind of like a bit of a different case because it's like you're still doing updates but just outside.
I was wondering if it was going to be something that like was like turned off by default and you had to opt into or something, so that people don't like update something by accident or something like that.
The idea is that you would be given the option, are you wanting to update this or not? If you want to update it, you could always go back. You could always uninstall a package if it's not working for you. We do have a safe mode whereby, like it'll only boot up with what was originally there for LTS, and you can uninstall components, things like that, so that the next time you restart, it doesn't actually make it. We've taken quite a bit of time to try to cover all the cases that we could think of where plugins cause problems, so that we can capture them. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why we don't really want to have a no holds barred kind of everybody weighing in and I've created a plugin and it does this. No, we want to have some form of accountability and trackability in terms of, okay, why did that crash? Because that plugin's gone mad, and or it was written for an older version that doesn't work this way anymore, and it's doing bad things. So we've been trying to think of all these different scenarios that could happen in worst case.
Would there be any like mechanism for having individual projects have their own versions of different plugins, so that especially if you're on LTS, if something's causing problems in one project, then it would load an older version?
That's not. We've not been thinking about project-specific things, just installation-specific things. So just kind of where you're installed. So no, that's not really something that we're thinking about. I think that would be problematic for us at the moment, as to how that works.
I imagine that would be a lot harder than doing it like for individual game assets versus having something that's like IDE level that would behave like that, because then it wouldn't be able to load until the project is loaded, or it would have to be able to unload on demand.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the moment plugins are loaded at startup of the IDE, and it's unloading them will be tricky. In fact, almost impossible to do with the way that .NET works. Just thinking through what that would actually mean. Yes, you've no longer got an app domain, so you can't just unload the app domain. So you can't actually unload the DLL simply. So it's not like we can reroute things. So yeah, no, it's going to be down to your startup. You would have to exit out of GameMaker and change the plugin list and then go back in again.
Sort of like now when you change a runtime version, you have to restart the IDE.
Yes, yeah, for similar reasons. I mean, there are components. The asset compiler is used just now when you're debugging. Okay, so it's loaded and it is part of the debugging process. So the asset compiler lives inside the runtime, and so we can't just switch runtime because of that. We've got to unload the asset compiler. We can't do that. We have to restart the whole thing.
I guess that is also a side interesting question that was just brought up in chat. Would we ever get the possibility installing like different kinds of IDEs? Like, I guess like in a similar sense, it's not as really needed for like once we get to LTS, but I could see the nicety of having like a separate IDE instance that's got a different set of parameters.
So right now, we have beta, we have monthly and LTS, and you said that LTS 2026 is going to be a separate install from 22. And the question here would be like if you wanted a separate instance of LTS 26 that had a different set of plugins installed, like a different profile or something.
Yeah.
Currently, you'd have to do that. I mean, you could do that, install the Steam version, and the Steam one could have a different set of things. That's one way of doing that. You can install GameMaker to different places. It does, and you can set it up so that it will use a different directory for things. So you could do it that way. I mean, just simply by going into the installer and telling it install over there, and then you can have a different default JSON thing in that, so that it will actually use a different user directory for yourself and things like that too. So they're possible, yes, and we may advertise that a bit more as we go forward. But we support these things for schools and things like that want to have different installations.
Fair enough. There was one more question I did want to ask, not entirely about the IDE plugins, but still about the IDE. Someone else also brought us up in chat a little bit earlier, and I kind of forgot about it in the doc. GML Visual, would we ever get the possibility of any updates on that in the near future?
Okay, GML Visual is... If by updates you mean more icons and being able to kind of set up your own code fragments that it will actually be expanded into, then yes, you can do that right now. You could actually have different, you could go in, there's an XML file that has all of the GML nodes in there. One of the plugins that we want to publish is the actual internal plugin that we've got for creating its GML Visual
just so that you don't have to write out the XML by hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's pretty horrible. It hasn't. It's kind of barely maintained. I have to admit, if I ever change anything, I go in with the XML. I don't use the plugin. But we are going to publish the source to that as much as an exercise for somebody to go in and improve the interface and make it work.
Admittedly,
100%.
Tabular, do you remember back in like the GameMaker 7, GameMaker 8 days when there was like the extension maker?
Yeah, that was a good time.
Or the action maker for I think that was the D&D items.
Yeah, essentially we have that, but it's a plugin to it's GameMaker, and we will be kind of giving out the source to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there was a long time ago when I actually did start messing with the XML files myself, and I was experimenting with adding my own visual blocks. Although I was kind of unsatisfied because it was all within like the exact same Yo-Yo Games like library functions, and it was like within like I think about 4 months ago, I tried redoing it again, but like trying to see if I could separate it in its own little category. Never got it to work, but
Okay.
it would be nice if we got like when it comes out.
I
Yeah.
vaguely remember that being
Yeah, no,
possible in the really old versions of GameMaker, because I remember messing around with like the extension maker, and suddenly there were like 15 extra tabs in the actions bar that didn't used to be there.
Yeah, you should be able to do. I would need to check where the IDE loads things from. It would just be that you could have a user directory that has GML visual things in there, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't support that. If we don't already, it might just be that it's not well known exactly.
I mean, a lot of it is not like documented, which is understandable.
Yeah, I would need to go and have a look through the code to actually find out where that loading gets done. But I suspect that there is already a user in your user directory. You can have GML visual nodes in there, but perhaps not. If not, it would be relatively simple to add, I think.
Right. I think that's about all I needed to talk about in terms of GML visual.
I'm kind of waiting for like documentation on IDE plugins before I like jump to any conclusions about it. Because I know that it's been said that it'll be eventually documented. I just have no idea what that's going to look like, and I'm sure that if I tried to like reverse engineer something and figure it out on my own, it's probably just going to change within the next couple of months anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to like poke at it myself, but I'm myself waiting for like something more official and concrete.
I know a couple of people have tried to make their own already. I don't know how far they got, and yeah, again, I'm sure it's going to change soon anyway. So whatever would be done now would probably be very different in 6 months.
I know one person has already gone ahead and made their own like custom events IDE plugin.
Caprice said, "Did someone say documentation?" Yep. Yeah, that's his trigger word, the same way that mine is 3D.
Oh no. We're getting lots of documentation now thrown at us.
Are there any current plans for lowering barriers to entry in GameMaker in general? I'm curious what you mean by that, Sparkling Phoenix, because there's... I know that it's probably one of the easier game engines to get into compared to the other major ones out there, but I'm curious if you have anything specific in mind.
The only thing I can think of is like GameMaker 8 simple mode.
I always hated the difference between advanced and simple mode just because it just hid things. Right? It's like you didn't even know that they existed, and so you know it's it was. I never ever liked the difference between it. I didn't see how it did anything else other than hide some complexity without hinting that you could do all these things. You know, like no, oh, there's some aspirational things that you can get to. No, you had to actually go and do advanced mode and then go and kind of look at those things. So and then be bamboozled and go back to simple mode. Whereas personally, I far prefer being able to see, oh, there is a whole lot of things. I don't know what those do just yet, but no, like, oh, there's loads of things in here. I feel safer because no, I know this can do much more than what I know about just now. Maybe that's a personal thing and people don't want to see that complexity, but it's personally, I always hated the difference between simple and advanced.
I know
I don't see how that makes it easier.
a while ago, I asked someone in GameMaker, I can't remember if it was Russell or someone else, if there was a chance of bringing back like simple mode for basically things that new users don't really need to care about, and that their answer was a very adamant no.
Yeah.
I
I don't
don't
see how
like.
it makes it easier to hide complexity like that. In terms of, it should still be visible. I mean, don't get me wrong. Just not showing things or even hinting that they're actually there. We could simplify user interfaces and things like that. I agree with that. I just don't want to hide it behind this sort of modal thing where it's you're either an idiot or you are not. Okay, so it's either I am hiding this because it's too scary for you. Don't look behind the curtain at all. I would rather show the curtain is actually there. There's things moving behind it, and that there are things so that you go, all right, okay, there's something interesting happening over there. I want to be able to see what's going on, and I can go and find it. As opposed to it's just not showing. We are just don't actually have it there. I hate that modal part of it where it's not shown because you're an idiot and don't need to see this. So
I don't hate simple mode, but I do feel like it's kind of a last resort if nothing else works to streamline the experience. Sparkling Phoenix elaborated on what they said earlier. Navigation is one of the bigger things. In IDE Wizards was one thing I have considered for early users. Many features are currently hidden behind menus, and people don't have a lot of incentive to explore. So I know that like two betas ago there was a like first time user experience pop up that was added.
yeah,
It's like a little
so
welcome screen.
Yeah, we've added a few things recently. It's kind of realization that we don't do enough. We want to do more. So there is more going to be coming, but they'll be in the form of initially kind of feature add-ons. We want to change the start screen, and we're going to have that come out as a plugin across next year, and we'll probably make it the default in a later update to LTS, so that it gets kind of switched on for everybody, which was just a nicer way for us to show things like recent projects and templates and things like that, but to also support getting news out to users better and things, so that we can tell people more about what's happening. And have events and things like that. And you'll be able to switch those things off. You don't want to bother with those, you don't switch them off, but it will give us avenues down which we could do that. Other things that we're looking at is an improve. The welcome screen thing that we put in, it was a little bit of this is something we could do quickly, but we'd like to have a bit more of an experience whereby we can focus on particular controls. This is where you go to play your game, press this button here, or that sort of thing, where it's not just an arrow pointing at it, but we're highlighting the button with a text box beside it, things like that. So we are going to be addressing things along those lines. We've also recently added, and you haven't all seen it yet because the template projects aren't out, but there's an ability now to put in README files directly in your project. This is going to be mainly for tutorial template creators and that sort of thing, where you can put documentation into notes files inside your project, and that now supports Markdown and supports linking into the actual project, and you can use sprites that are in your project within your within those notes, and that will give you the ability to direct people's attention on particular projects to its kind of different components and things like that within that actual project, so that within your template you can actually call out its kind of various parts and do documentation easier, that sort of thing. And it's the sort of thing we're also going to be using to promote prefab documentation and things as well, So you can include a note within your prefab that provides documentation, and you can do it's kind of URL links essentially within your to other notes within your project too.
I keep thinking of going back to the old like GameMaker 8 tutorials that were built into the IDE. I feel like that would be fun. I'm not completely sure if what you just described is exactly that, or if it's just like a visual.
It is more or less that without having to do full HTML, because you can use Markdown to do most of it.
I also have the feeling that one way or the other, this is something that people, once they get their hands on user prefabs, will be making on their own. We'll see what that looks like. Would you be able to link to the project from the documentation? For example, placing a link to a section in a comment someone asked. That's an interesting question. I know that there are URL links in Code Editor too, aren't there? So you can like link to like different assets from like a note
I'll need to check with Zach. I think you can link to notes from within your comments. I'll have to check with Zach if whether or not within your notes can you link. You could definitely link to assets.
I know you can like embed sprites and stuff, right?
Yes, but I think you can link to the asset as well, so that when you click on it, it would show you in the asset browser or in the inspector. That thing. I'm not sure whether or not you could click on a line of code. The problem is that would,
Yeah, I can't remember
the
if
line
it goes
number
both
may
ways
drift
either.
over time.
I was actually just testing it right now. Like I made like a basic like note in a random project, and I middle clicked on it, and it like brought up the note asset. So I guess that answers it.
Yeah,
The same way that like middle clicking a sprite will open the sprite.
Yeah, it's just not highlighted in beta at least. But it works.
The desire is that you can have a set of documentation and things like that would work within the project as it currently stands, but it would also then work when your project's up on GitHub, because that's an MD file that will still work as well. That sort of thing, so that like the documentation, we're fostering the ability to have your documentation be live. It's live within GameMaker, it could be live within GitHub and things like that as well.
Yeah. I will also answer the question as well. I was also testing URL links from like say like GameMaker's manual, for example, if you just want to like have that linked in the comments, or your own library documentation. That also does work in at least Code Editor 2. You can also middle click.
Yeah. CE1 doesn't support any of these things, but CE2 is designed to support things like that.
Yeah. All right. I think we've had a good chat about the IDE and its various potential IDE plugins we could have in the future. Why don't we move on to the next topic? Circling back to GMRT and the graphics pipeline, WebGPU.
I probably should have put this in the actual GMRT section, but maybe it's just as well, because I saw Snitter was in here a few minutes ago, and I'm sure he'd love to actually hear about this.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are adopting WebGPU as our graphics low-level interface. So the whole of GMRT, anything to do with rendering, goes through WebGPU. We are exposing WebGPU to GML users in much the same way as JavaScript exposes WebGPU. So there is an interface, you can program to it directly. We have been gradually adding more features to that. There is a link that we have for the documentation. It's sitting in the document that I can see in front of me.
Actually, I think I'll post this in the stream chat too, so that everyone knows what we're looking at.
This is just a basis on which we are starting the WebGPU journey. So it doesn't have everything in there, but you can do You can do compute shaders. You can get the information out of the compute shader. You can pass parameters into it. You can get surfaces back, that sort of thing. WebGPU is a modern, it's kind of graphics pipeline. It does support things like 3D textures. It does support multiple texture formats, compressed textures. We are not imposing limits on what you can actually do, so it's everything that WebGPU can do right now, and it is supported over most platforms. It's that we are writing our own console backend, so we're just finishing off Switch at the moment. We'll get Switch 2 done, and we'll be doing PlayStation 5 and Xbox. Xbox is easier because it's the library that we are using to implement WebGPU, which is called Google Dawn. That is that already supports sort of DX12, so that'll make it much easier. So it's basically WebGPU is good. It has all sorts of modern interfaces, and it works by creating compute pipelines. We obviously have a compute. Sorry, I said compute. That's wrong. It has pipelines, GPU pipelines, down which you create all of your state information. We provide it so that you can create your own pipeline completely, which includes shaders. It includes state of how the kind of GPU is set up, and you can just using the current buffer interface, you can create those buffers and add them in as well, so you could draw your own things completely.
I know you've said like compute as like the wrong word, but I know a couple of times, at least in the chat, people have brought up about compute shaders.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, compute is just a little bit of WebGPU. So compute basically just means that you can create programs that aren't just vertex shaders or pixel shaders. So a vertex shader has particular inputs to it, where it takes a stream of vertices, and for each vertex, you get a chance to run a program on it. The output from a vertex shader is then rasterized for edges, so that a triangle, so for every triangle, essentially three times a vertex shader has been and the edges of that triangle are rasterized, and then for every pixel across the triangle that's run, the pixel shader will be run. A compute shader is completely different. It doesn't have vertices. It doesn't have a vertex stream that comes in, and it's not the output from the compute shader is not actually passed anywhere automatically. A compute shader is basically just a blob of code that is run against a blob of data, and it outputs another blob of data. So it can do anything. Okay, it just has to be set up so that the sizes of the blobs that go in and the size of the blob that goes out is matches the hardware that you're on, and you can run those programs as many times as you want. And the state that you've got is the input state, that blob of data that comes in. There is a minimal amount of RAM that you've got that can be used, and that state can be rerun between shaders, but you don't necessarily know which CPU core you're actually going to be running on, or GPU core, I should say. So it's a bit more complicated. So a compute is a different pipeline. Now, the output from a compute shader can be passed directly to a vertex one. So you can have for example, you could have Bezier curves or something like that on the input to a compute shader, just the parameters to the Bezier curve, and the compute shader could compute the triangles required for that Bezier curve, and then you pass that to, you can then chain that to a vertex shader so that the output from the compute shader goes directly to the vertex shader. You can do all that, and but compute within WebGPU gives you the opportunity to do lots of different sorts of work. So that it could do physics, it could be anything where you're needing to compute data.
I know that it's pretty common for people to ask, like, will GameMaker ever get, like, compute shaders, which makes me think that the WebGPU part of GMRT is not especially well known outside of the, like, very hardcore users, because people keep asking it and they keep, like, they're surprised to find out that something is actually happening here.
Yeah.
Right now, it's...
I feel like I keep
there.
talking about it and have been for the last 3 years.
Yeah, something like that. Has it been 3 years already? I know that it's there. It's still not that easy to use because it's, I think, at least for me, it's not syntax highlighted still. So you kind of have to just, like, look at the documentation and guess, and then run it. And the error messages are of varying degrees of help. And sometimes, if it doesn't work, it won't necessarily tell you why. So at least for me, I messed around with it when it first appeared. I've kind of decided that I'm just going to wait until it's at least more fully fleshed out before I continue messing with it. And I really have no idea when the timeline for that is going to be.
You'll see more from us across the next year as we get things like an LSP sorted out for shaders, that sort of thing. There isn't actually a lot of things out there just now. People make shaders are just not using it's syntax highlighting and things like that. Oh, well, syntax highlighting is easy. It's
the shaders in a WGSL still have to be written as text strings and then passed to the like the shader compile function, right?
Yeah, kind of GMRT side things, we will be supporting GLSL and things like that. So you will inherit those things. It's kind of going forward, and you can write compute shaders in those as well. So it's just handling. We will be handling the GLSL to WGSL thing right at this moment in time. The easiest way to use raw WebGPU for compute shaders is just to use raw WGSL, which is either strings that you just embed within the your code, or you load a separate file as a string and pass that to, and you can use a separate text editor to handle WGSL as long as it has an LSP and syntax highlighter for that. So you can do that right now. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Tara said, WebGPU gives much better error messaging than compared to the current runtime shaders. I guess it's been improved a lot since the last time I did it, so I guess I'm going to have to go and look at it again. Exor, yes. If you're looking for examples on compute shaders, I think Taro has done a couple things with them. I think there's also a few examples up on the GitHub if you want to mess around yourself, unless you're meaning for like a general audience, then I don't know.
There have been some members of the community who have done things. It is all possible. Patrick Crave, who is one of the internal programmers, he's been playing with things as well. So we know that we can do these things, and we're going to be expanding what's possible there. Again, this will only be done on GMRT. That's where we're going to be doing all of our kind of big changes. It's going forward.
Oh, here's another one. Are you planning on officially implementing stuff into compute shaders and shipping it, for example, the physics engine or pathfinding or something like that? I'm guessing not, but I'm interested to hear if there are actually any plans for this.
We are planning lots of different things, but we want to get 2414 compatibility on GMRT, get compatibility library out, and then we're going to turn our attention. So, speculating about the future, we have lots of ideas, lots of things that we want to be able to do. I'm not going to. Yes, we plan on doing these things. What they are exactly, we'll keep you posted.
It's still currently cooking the pot. Come back in maybe a year and a half, 2 years.
Yes. It's LTS 28.
Yeah,
But we will
probably.
have betas between now and then. It's
At some
after we
point
ship
before the end
LTS
of the decade.
26. Yeah, once we finish LTS 26 and get that out, we will have a bit of a hiatus as we are reworking things in the background, preparing for the switchover of everything towards GMRT. But because we're only having to write it once, we should go faster on that. We're not having to do things multiple times.
I've said a few times in the past that probably once I really sit down to work with GMRT and compute shaders, I'm going to try to write like a particle system. Partially because that's just inherently a fun thing to write, and also because from the sound of it, particles are something that really like gets to the essence at what compute shaders are good at, and I'm interested in seeing how far exactly that can be taken.
No, there's some interesting stuff. It's many moons ago I worked on Medal of Honor Frontline, and they had an amazing particle engine inside that reutilized PlayStation 2 vector units and things like that. And there was some amazing things that you're able to do there. Compute shaders are essentially that. We did Xbox and GameCube, and we had lots of issues with generating their particles on the more traditional pipelines of an Xbox and it's kind of GameCube with comparison to what you could do with the PlayStation 2 vector units. And it's quite interesting, the different approaches, particularly when you can chain these things to go output these things from compute straight into vector, into the vector units, as convertex shaders, I should say, and then straight onto pixel, things like that, so that you can actually get that whole pipelines set up simply.
Immediately in the chat, we are getting a couple more questions about GMRT, which some of it's not really about compute shaders or WebGPU in general, but one of the questions was about web workers in GMRT.
Our plan is to support multi-threading in GMRT. It won't be out the box, it won't be in the compatibility side of things, but we will be supporting multi-threading. You'll be able to do it out the box as we do C#, because in C# you can just create a thread and away you go. I'm not a big fan of just exposing the whole create a thread thing, because working with threads is tricky. It's not that we don't do it, it's just exposing it at a GML level in terms of introducing a newbie to this is how multi-threading works.
You don't want to full gun.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically you can blow your foot off easily, right? And go, why is this not working? Get discouraged and then not bother coming back. So I think that is. I prefer a task-based sort of thing where you go, I want to run this task in parallel with other things and have very well-defined inputs and outputs. So personally, I think that's a GML v3 type issue, where it's more about the language side of things and how you introduce those. So GMRT is capable. One of the things that we've been doing while we've been rewriting it is taking out current runtime is never done with any thought to multi-threading. It is stateful as anything. It has global variables all over the join, and we've been excising all of those, making them application level, thread level, and kind of variables, or just eliminating them altogether. So that we'd be trying to make things so much better from from that multi-threading side of things, because currently you cannot use the current runtime in any sort of multi-threading scenario. It is just too stateful and has no thought to multi-threading at a GML, running GML code at a multi-threading.
It's been like that since GMS1 especially, because I know people have actually attempted it and even had live demonstrations of them doing multi-threading, and then they showed all the race conditions.
Yes.
That just is inherent to threading in general, though.
Yeah.
You have code that's threaded, and suddenly it's not working, and it's not even not working the same way every time you run the game.
Yes. Here, like dragons.
Okay. Yes.
I would obviously definitely use threading if it was provided to me. I don't think it's the biggest problem the GameMaker faces right now, especially because it is in a major way a learning tool. You could probably make the argument that it is a good way to learn threading after you learn everything else, but that's a debate for some other time.
The only thing I would have to say is that it would definitely benefit me, but also have my own green thread implementation, or I guess fake multi-threading, and that works fine enough for me for most things GameMaker related.
I think there's a difference between multi-threading and asynchronous stuff. So I think we've addressed a lot of the asynchronous issues with the call later and things like that, whereby you can set something up to happen a little bit later, and it happens on the main thread, and it's all stateful and things like that. A lot of multi-threading side of things, people are wanting to do big batches of processing and things like that. And I suspect that a lot of that will be better done in a language which supports that sort of thing. So in our C# bindings, things like that, you will be able to create threads and that sort of stuff. So I think that at least initially on GMRT, that will be the main way in which we support it. It's going to going forward, but task-based multi-threading within GML, I think would be better done as a sort of GML v3 type feature, but GMRT is more than capable to do it.
I think it's the sort of thing where if it was just relegated to another language, I would be satisfied. I wouldn't probably lose sleep if you could write threaded code in C#, but you couldn't in GML. I do feel like if you're going to be using threads, you should have a level of computer science acumen where you understand how to use C# anyway.
Yep.
And at least for GML...
Sorry, you go. Sorry, go for it.
I was going to say, and with GML v2, you're still going to have your options in a sense of multi-thread if you really needed to, just calling off another language to handle the work.
Yes, yeah. No, essentially, you can call GML functions from C#, so you can just pass in a callback and say to your C# go away, do that across multiple threads, call this function each time you go through, you iterate over whatever you're iterating, that sort of thing. So you'll be able to do things like that. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the questions which have come through. Topher was asking about regex support. You could call JavaScript stuff from within it's GML. We have a full regex library in there, so just standard JavaScript stuff. So you'll be able to handle that, not a problem. You'll be able to disable individual built-in variables, like your HP score, high score. That's a GML v2 thing. So not in GML v2, but GML v3, yes, because they're part of GML language.
That's another thing.
So you don't have that problem inside.
For forever.
Yeah, it's part of GML. That's part of that definition. So
by that, do you mean that there would be if you create a object or something with GML2, would it come preloaded with variable definitions for health and score or whatever, and you would be able to edit those just like normal code, or do you mean that it would be something?
Well, it's part of the GML v2 execution that it goes, score. Oh, you mean this one, this global that I've already got. Essentially, these things are like a global var. I mean, and I am, I have said for a long time, I hate global var. It's a horrible thing. It means you have to you have to type less, but actually you're hiding things. And global HP score and high score and all the rest of it, they are essentially built-in global vars. They are part of the language. It's part of GML. GML v3, should we decide to, you can my preference would be that we don't have these things. Okay, if you want them, create them yourself. Okay, so they would not be there. So in GML v3, you wouldn't have these as globals. You wouldn't have them as built-in variables at all. They're kind of so it's kind of, I see these as language level things. In C# we don't have those. In sort of JavaScript we don't have those. No, as the JavaScript you write just now, you've actually got to refer to them directly to change the GML version of it. But so, as far as I'm concerned, that's a GML v2 versus a GML v3 thing.
I feel like people are gonna fight me on this, but I think breaking a lot of things going into GMRT with GML3 would, if there's any time to do it, it would be now.
Yeah, we're not going into the compatibility library. We are not going to be breaking things. We want the maximum compatibility. We don't want people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to GMRT just because of X, Y, Z." It's going to be very much edge cases. It's going to be the case where somebody has insisted that they need to use indices for referring to assets, insisted that they are not going to kind of handle things in better ways. But
yeah, the compatibility runtime is fine, but the GMRT itself, I think it would probably be the arguably last opportunity GameMaker has to do things like cleaning up the like the room view array variables or the built-in.
Oh right, yeah, no,
things like that.
These things will change. These will change, but you'll be choosing it at a project level where you go, no, this is a GMRT project. This isn't a compatibility project. So we haven't really talked about that, I suppose. But at some point, you will go in and say, I want to do this project, and this project is a GMRT one. It's not going to have any compatibility side things in it at all. It's not going to have any. It'll be linked with different libraries that implement things in a cleaner way. That is a point where it'll be a break. If you decide that you're going to bring in GML, it's kind of v2 stuff, then you'll still have score and all the rest of it because that's part of GML v2. But you don't need to. You could say this is a GML v3 project, and I'm going to kind of use that. But that would be the break at that point. When we make that break from this is a current runtime project to this is a GMRT project only. Current runtime, you'll be able to mix things a little bit. You'll be able to have some older stuff and some newer stuff. GMRT, you'll only be able to use GMRT stuff.
Recently, I submitted a feature request to clean up the bizarre situation that is the collision functions in GameMaker, because there's like 15 or 20 different collision functions that do almost exactly the same thing. And they did tell me that was being looked at, cleaning up the collisions API, so I am looking forward to that.
Yeah, that will be different in a pure GMRT project. And we will have more of an object-oriented style interface to things like that, where the collision system will be accessible as some sort of object, and you will do things on that, and it will just have better semantics around it. Essentially, there are so many things. You've got to remember, we inherited GameMaker.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the decisions had already been made.
Oh, it looks a lot like it was the sort of thing that was built over 20 years without anything ever getting removed.
Yeah.
Trying to explain to people when they need to use place meeting versus like instance place versus one of the other collision functions is just...
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, but I don't think we would ever design it to the way in which it actually is. It has accreted over time. It's like layers of just different things, and then a lot of it is we were not, at least initially, we were not allowed to break things. Everything had to work all the way back. And it's only in the last 5 years or so since I took over that we kind of are allowing ourselves to break projects from 2009 when we first started. That's essentially kind of where we're at the moment.
I forget, what was the first compatibility flag that was added? It was something like legacy, like collision behavior or legacy random number behavior or something like that. And then a couple of years later, disabled
there was
copy
a
and write
problem
came
with
along, and that was a big deal.
Yes. Yeah. No, there's been a bunch of things because people forget that in GM8 you couldn't access arrays outside of script. When you passed them in, they got copied all the time. So when a script called another script and passed an array in, it copied everything. You didn't have plus plus and minus minus and all sorts of horrible things. No, the language was just so much. Had so many things missing.
Trying to describe the old array situation from like GM8 to people who came from other programming languages just sounds like it's completely made up. It sounds like why would a language ever do that?
In a sense, it sounds curse. And it is.
Tara said we need an archaeologist to go through all those layers. There's like, and someday I'm gonna actually do this, but like a GameMaker cursed behavior iceberg list.
Yeah.
Position change is going to be at the very top, the extremely top. Nothing will top it. That's it.
Yeah, it's very cursed. Yes. Oh, and that other one that I wasn't even, was it position change? Something like that?
I think so.
That's even more cursed.
Yeah,
make everything that's here one of these.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of like getting a foot gun and then like strapping like a bunch of shotguns on top, like around in a circle, and having one trigger, and you just fire all the shotguns.
Yeah.
Wasn't there also like position destroy or something, which will just nuke every object out of position?
I think that is still there. Yeah.
I know. I suspect that's still there. Yeah. I don't think we've removed that.
Yeah, it's right here. It's still there.
At least that one doesn't like sound like it does something completely different from what the name is, the way that position change sounds like it does, but it's still like bizarre.
It's not fantastic, but I mean it is at least more accurate. Yeah.
Anyway,
I feel
we have been going on for 2 hours. I don't know how much time you two have. There's not too much left on the list.
Well, I mean, it's not like I gotta have all the time in the world, although it is now midnight. So we should probably start wrapping this up where we can.
So I saw this come through chat a couple of times. I didn't address it then because I knew that it was on the list. But the Ubuntu IDE, is that ever going to leave the purgatory state that is the beta branch?
Yes, I'm hoping to persuade our QA that we can, on LTS 26, we'll actually have an Ubuntu IDE. It will still be called beta, but we'll just be on the beta branch. Secret for all of the Linux guys is that it's actually built every single time, and if you just use the URL pattern, then you will find the fact that the IDEs are actually there in general for Ubuntu, but we'll look to officially put that on as that there is an Ubuntu LTS 26, but it will still be termed beta just because I still think that Linux is beta.
Yeah.
I mean,
whenever I start to think that the Linux IDE is in a pretty good situation, I just look in the Linux Woes channel in the kitchen, and someone has found a completely brand new way to break things that isn't there on Windows.
Sometimes
how things often go on Linux.
Yeah. I mean, I experience my own sort of issues with Linux sometimes, and I usually just try to like bug report it or like figure out a way to work around it, like installing Linux on non-Ubuntu and all the slippery slopes it has.
I've used the Linux IDE. I've never run into anything that's like completely show-stopping, but every once in a while something just weird and annoying will happen. Like, oh, there goes the DPI setting. Don't know why, but I have to go and
Yep.
fix that by hand.
Yeah. I'm still wanting to like trying to like unify every single potential like Linux issue and like the workarounds that you have on that.
Well,
So
the
it's like,
big problem with that is that it'll be different on not only different distributions of Linux, but different like environments within the same distribution of Linux,
well, yeah, definitely.
which
But
is
at the same time, it wouldn't hurt to at least try a little. And it's like that's kind of obviously like a community focus at that point because like the Ubuntu like IDE, like no way I'm gonna see that like being on every single distro in a perfect fashion like day one. But there is always the potential day where Linux will get like the Ubuntu IDE gets stable enough on the other distros where you could just slap it onto the curse of them all, Arch Linux, and just have it run.
I go back and forth on
But
whether I think it'll ever be stable enough to call stable. I think a lot of that is on Linux itself to like not have 50 different versions of every single thing.
Yep.
yeah,
We're a small team. We can't actually support all of the different versions of Linux that are actually out there. We try to keep it as stable as we possibly can, but Linux themselves keep moving things around. All the different distros do things differently. We rely on certain tools that all seem to, FFmpeg being the one that I can think of off the top of my head. There's another one.
Does it
it's
use
SteamOS.
FNA for the IDE for the C# environment?
Yeah, that's not actually too bad on there. The ones that we've had problems with are FFmpeg DLLs because we upgraded to the most recent version of FFmpeg, but it seemed that every Linux distribution was lagging on old versions, and they make and I know they made a they were on an older version, and FFmpeg had made a breaking API change between the versions, and so we had huge problems with that. That caused a lot of issues on Linux. All the other platforms were quite happy, but on Linux it was just all over the place. Stuff like that.
yeah. There was
Um,
some other issues I've had, like with Pulse Audio, like once upon a time
yes.
on Pop OS, which like I already had Pulse Audio, but because GameMaker had like a specific requirement for Pulse Audio, it just broke.
I remember spending days fighting with that on Linux Mint a while ago.
And at least on the bright side with me right now, the only issue I have is like no audio, I think, in the IDE, but like I also don't really have speakers for my Linux PC at the moment, so it's like it doesn't really bother me.
Yeah, imagine sending that as the solution to a bug. Just unplug your speakers, then you can't hear it anyway.
Yeah. It's an ongoing product, and it's just such a tiny part of the market. Our 90% of our users are on Windows. 9 to 10% are on Mac. 0.01% are on Linux. It's like, where do we spend our time?
I'm
Not on
actually
Linux.
surprised it's that much for Mac now.
Yeah,
I guess people
no,
like the M1s and the M2s a lot more than they like the old ones.
Yep. I mean, I'm using. I've got an M4 Pro now, and it's amazing, and I use it a lot more these days. I use Parallels, and I can do a lot of my PC work on the Parallels machine rather than having to go to PC. So I find myself less doing that.
I rock an M1 myself. I don't really use it as my daily driver, but I do tend to use it for a few things, Mac related and not Mac related. Like right now, we have the entire GameMaker screening documentation just on my Mac screen because it's just easy to look at.
I've thought a few times about seeing like how cheaply I can get like an old MacBook Air or something to do Apple builds for things, but I've never done it because I don't even know how many people would play it, and that there's a huge headache with going through Xcode and all that. That just doesn't seem like a good use of my time at the moment.
Well, I mean, that's not the only thing you'd have to be concerned about, anyways. macOS just had like I think it was macOS 26 Taui. Yeah, they just released that one, and that is speculated or mentioned to be the last version that they'll actually support Intel Macs.
Oh, great, Apple, thanks.
Yeah, so all the Intel Macs from like next year or whatnot are just gonna off.
In some ways, I'm surprised that it's lasted this long, but still.
I mean, I feel like if I recall, I think a lot of like Apple's like ecosystem, they usually have like a 7 to 10 year like lifetime for all the devices. So it's like they've had a lot of Intel Macs within like the last decade. So it's just the last few are still clinging on at this point.
I guess it has been like 5 years now. Anyway, Gleb
Yeah.
wants to get a GameMaker scream from Russell live. Should we save that to the end? Should we wrap up the last few
Well,
things before that?
I mean, everyone has been asking for this
Well,
for
yes,
days
but
on end, and
now
and
Gleb
it's
is
on
trying
the
to
dot.
bribe me into it, so that's a little bit more emphatic.
Glad if
Yeah.
you can be patient to the very end, then we'll do it at the end.
Right.
But if you can't be
Can I just
patient,
say, yeah, I'll happily do that. I can scream GameMaker at microphone, no problem. But Elias had asked a question. Update on multiplayer. We're working with providers of multiplayer solutions, and we hope to have an announcement soon. Is the best way that I can put that, I think, at the moment. And on Mac, there are issues with menu bar freezing. Yes, the recent Mac OSs seem to have changed how they're handling menus, and we've had issues with that. There is fixes on beta for that, and 24.14 should hopefully fix that. Please check out the beta and see if there are any things kind of going there. So, yeah, you could do that.
There a long
I'm
time
not
ago
sure.
now, there was a rollback netcode addition to GameMaker, and from what it sounds like is that is being completely redone because I haven't heard anything about it in quite a while.
Yeah, no, we realised that the way in which they were, so that was an internal Opera team that were looking at that, and I think it was a good idea, but it didn't really work. There was so many edge cases for that the whole concept, it really needed more things happening inside that and more user input to it. It couldn't be done automagically the way that we were thinking at that
I
time.
never
So
used it because I don't really do a lot with online, but I remember people
yeah,
coming up with issues that were things like the gameplay could be synchronized, but the UI would drift out because you couldn't
yeah.
you couldn't
I say there's
access.
all sorts of edge cases that
Yeah,
we didn't really. So that was essentially put on hold. It will come. There are more mature solutions already out there that we are partnering with just now to provide multiplayer in lots of different forms rather than just in one specific area. So I think that that's probably the best way going forward, whereby rather than just trying to roll our own, that actually we partner with somebody who does it full time.
we have at least two other topics to cover on hand, and I know both of these you've actually filled in the document yourself, Russell.
Mhm.
The one being gamepads, which I think you've already answered, like a while back.
Yeah, so gamepads, GMRT is built with SDL2. That has a very mature gamepad system inside there. We are using that, and on Windows on Windows, Mac, and Linux that provides quite a mature gamepad experience going forward. It doesn't differentiate between the different the various technologies that provide things. It means that we're not having to go back and backpatch things for various new pads that come out and things like that. So yeah, no, we're sitting on top of that. It's much more mature. It is the way forward there.
The current runtime does use the SDL database, doesn't it? But it's just to like look up IDs so that it can identify things.
Yes, it's because on direct input there is no. I originally added that because there is no way of knowing. Direct input just gives you a bunch of buttons and a bunch of axes and a bunch of what's called a hat.
Those are like the D-pad,
It's
like
like
structures,
D-pad
right?
things, yeah. Really, they're for joysticks where you used to have a little thing on top of a joystick. That's what it actually refers to. But basically, direct input doesn't give you back any more than just that. But you don't have any idea what they're mapped to. So I picked up the SDL database and went, oh look, that actually tells you. It gives you a mapping for each device. I'll just use that, and I put that in, and we weren't built on SDL2. I was just using that database just as a way of finding out for direct input what, kind of for this device, this is how you should map the different buttons and axes and hats, things like that. So that's kind of where all that came from. I only really became aware of SDL2 properly on its Gamepad, I think, as part of doing all that. So yeah, we've just adopted that completely, and the way in which that works, because the technologies change quite quickly over time. And
I've been using input for so long that I actually can't remember how GameMaker handles gamepad stuff on its own anymore.
people just don't want to think about it.
I still have ideas on it, but I too don't think about it either. I just blink it out.
Make it someone else's problem when possible.
Yep.
Anyway, the last item on our list that we wrote down for this is DearImGui. So you added that. I think I didn't know about this until you wrote it down here, Russell.
Yeah, so IMGUI, we've been using it with the debug overlay in the current runtime. I started using it because it's A, I think it's great, and B, it gives us an easy way to have a consistent interface to different things. Previously, we had lots of debug overlay things which kind of all wanted to be on top of the screen, and there was no way of manipulating things and moving different windows and things like that around, etc. So we adopted IMGUI for debug overlay. DearImGui gives a nice interface cross-platform that supports mice and it's got gamepads and things like that as well. So we're carrying that on into GMRT, and Norman had done a library IMGUI GML, and I've been looking into what we can do there. Unfortunately, the way that the IMGUI is built is great for C++, but for a dynamic language, it's not that great. So exposing the interface is difficult to do, and it's not something we're going to do in the current runtime. But on GMRT, we should be able to support essentially what the IMGUI GML does directly within XKGMRT. I've not implemented it yet, but I am planning to, and it would use the same IMGUI as we already have within GameMaker itself. So you're not duplicating any efforts there. And that would just be exposed as functions, and it'll be pretty much the same functions as, unless there's a good reason for me to break it. But I was at Bit Summit this year, which is great conference, by the way. I thoroughly recommend it. It's very small, and kind of Kyoto is a great city to have it in. There's lots of game developers and very friendly. But I bumped into Omar, who is the creator of DearImGui, and we had a very amusing conversation around about kind of what we both did, and we started the discussion on how IDE could support dynamic languages. So we'll be carrying that on, and we'll see if there's more that we can do there.
Gleb is reminding us that it is IMGUI_GM. IMGUI GML is the old one that Rouser made a long time ago.
Ah, right. So, yeah,
forgot
the
about
more
that
modern one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I like GameMaker's debug overlays. They're good for a lot of things. There's in most cases, all you really need is a text input or a slider or a debug sprite view or something like that. But sometimes it would be nice to be able to organize things into tabs or to use some of the other user interface elements.
Yeah, the debug interface I added was really just intended for something quick that you're going to, and it's used all the time here by the content team as they're creating things for a quick tool to just change something. And that's all they're really intended for. If you're making a full-on user interface, then yeah, you obviously need full IMGUI support. And we weren't really planning on that. This was just a way in which we could give you a quick, easy-to-use GML-style interface to these things.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time, all I really need it for is like a button to teleport to a different room or like an input field to set the player health or something like that. I don't need anything complicated, but once in a while, other features are nice to have.
Yep.
All right. Do we have anything else? Are there any other questions that came through the stream chat that I missed? Or is it time to sign off and do the GameMaker shout?
There is one more thing I do actually want to bring up, but not a question, but something I am experimenting with in regards to GMRT. I don't have it like all concrete planned out, but I did kind of want to make a game for GMRT, like from scratch. But
like
the problem is that
as a way to see what it's
like test the waters, see what works, what doesn't from the current runtime, and I felt like it was a lot easier if I was to make a brand new project because I could throw any project at it and it would probably work once we have 0.18 come out. But I also kind of just want to get like a fresh mind on it. So there is a project I have been working on in terms of like a sort of like little boss like game project where there'll be like a series of like a bunch of games that anyone can like just pop in and like work on it.
So
I'm mainly gonna
for GMRT,
have it
basically.
loungewear, but not really loungewear. More like a selection of like arcade games that you can kind of play through. But it's also for more current runtime, so it kind of plays two roles. One, just kind of like kick off, have fun, makes a few little games here and there, but also kind of like a little test suite for GMRT to kind of see how it handles up. Because I felt like that's like a good middle ground.
Almost like the test framework, but an actual game, you're saying then.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I would encourage people to be using GMRT more. We do know that there was a lot of there was a lot of functions, particularly things that Scribble required, things like that weren't working, and we've seen that as an impediment for people testing things because the first thing they try doesn't work because they're using one of these libraries that use a particular function which didn't actually wasn't supported properly yet. But GMRT version 0.18 will have I think we're sitting about 97 to 98% compatibility now in terms of functions that are implemented and are present. There's most of the ones which aren't implemented just now are actually the newer SVG functions. That's still to be put in. The SWF ones still work, but the SVG ones, particularly things that have been added in 24.14, itself.
The some of those cache functions.
Yes, yeah, they're not added yet, but they're.
I know for a long time, I would, whenever a GMRT update came out, I would try to throw like whatever old projects I had on hand at it, and usually something like the font STF functions wouldn't be implemented yet, so that would just make it not compile, and then take those out. And
they're definitely in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely in now. So
things like doing something with a shader that it didn't like would make it break in random ways, or things like that.
We definitely want to know these things, so it'd be good to report them. Yeah, it's currently we're sitting at. Let's see, we've got less than 100 functions to go now.
You should put like a countdown on the website that's like how many functions are still WIP.
Yeah, well, in 3,056 out of 3,148 is the figures I can see, which seems low actually. There's about 4,500 functions in GameMaker. So
I think in the fnames file there's like 4,500 lines, but I think a lot of those are like deprecated things that don't actually work.
Yeah, there'll be various structs and things like that, and that won't include the platform-specific functions as well. A bunch of those.
We have.
Gleb said, Russell, can you touch on the fixed time step thing we talked about a couple of times? Do you mean like unfixing GameMaker's time step?
I think it was like essentially kind of like adding like a separate event or like separate section where you can like have like step and draw just be decoupled completely.
There's no reason why you can't do that. We won't be able to support it. We won't support it in compatibility. In GMRT, there is no reason why you can't actually do that in any way yourself. You would essentially be going, I want to run steps on call later at 50 hertz, 60 hertz, whatever you want to do, and then maintain your draw loop yourself. Now, as to whether or not we're going to support that, we've discussed it internally. What's the complications as to what you would actually do? You have to get into interpolation on different things as to exactly what do you mean then. If there's 5 draw events for every step event, does that mean you're interpolating things, or are you just drawing the same thing 5 times? And some of those are aesthetic choices. They're not necessarily just things that an engine should be making for you. The engine should probably make it easier for you to do, but as to how you actually handle that. So there's a whole lot of policy decisions around being able to do that. Out of the box, I know Unity does this where they run their step event at n frames per second, and your rendering happens as fast as it possibly could. I say, I think that there's aesthetic decisions around that too. That you're having to make. So GMRT allows us to do it, and it would be a breaking change. So it's definitely going to be inside the GMRT project if we actually do it. I don't think it's a noob thing. You know, like it's not necessarily something that will be front and center straight out the box that this is how it works and you have to work around it, because there's all sorts of complications you have to do at that point. You have to start explaining to people what's the difference between wall clock and game clock and things like that, and having to when pause happens, what does that actually mean? It means your step event's not getting called, but your draw event is, but you still need your step event for the pause menu and things like that. So there are complications around how all these things kind of happening. So there's lots of discussions to be had about that.
In general, it's worth bearing in mind that just simply untethering the step event from the draw event isn't going to give you a free uncapped frame rate. A lot of people in Unity will just treat their fixed update and their rendering update as basically the same thing, and all of a sudden, since Unity's fixed update runs at 50 hertz and the rendering update runs at 60 or whatever, it just looks like you're dropping frames. It doesn't look smooth, and
Yes.
not doing that honestly is probably a lot more work than just having it be fixed. And I don't consider this to be like, it would be nice. Would I use it if it was in GameMaker? Probably, but it's not like the biggest problem I see facing the engine.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of people seem to see it as being it's going to solve all no nils. In my experience, it actually opens up a whole can of worms in terms of how you handle things, and then now you can't do this scenario anymore. You've got to do it a more complicated way. You know, you start to get into all sorts of things there, and you know, why is because the interpolation, you know, you're essentially you have to at some point you end up interpolating into the future, and then that future has changed because that didn't really happen because in the simulation behind it, it's and then you end up into all sorts of laggy behavior and things like that as well. So it's not the panacea that people think it is. In many cases, it's not going to solve your frame rate issues particularly necessarily. It doesn't necessarily make your step any better either. To Gleb's thing, trivial pausing, I actually agree with you on that in terms of, but I don't think you need to separate your concept of game clock and wall clock. So generally, just now everything runs on a wall generally on a wall clock, whereas you should have a game clock which just stops advancing when you pause. What I want to do is to give everything a timing source so that you can easily just go, right, okay, everything that's in the world, in the game, they automatically work off of the game clock, and you can just pause the game clock, in which case their step events will stop because game clock isn't advancing. Whereas you would actually have a wall clock, and you can pause this, your pause menus and all the rest of it can happen off the wall clock, and so as they carry on, so that you can get the pause behavior without having the separating your step events and draw events. So I think that we could get one without the other necessarily. Just now, so I think there's just different ways of doing it. You do have to separate time out so that you can pause game time as opposed to it's kind of real time, such. So.
A lot of people seem
it's
to want
on our
some
list
sort
of
out-of-the-box pausing system.
Yes, I was going to say it's on my big list for GMRT of things that we need to solve. Real world problems that should be simple that aren't.
It would be
and
nice.
GameMaker standard solution of. Sorry.
Yeah, so like it would be really nice to have like a really good pause system because like there are so many pause solutions that people have, and some are between like okay to a lot of repetitiveness to downright it works, but it breaks in other ways.
To this day, the only pausing system that I really like in GameMaker is just in every object step event checking if the game is paused, and if it is, then just don't run the step event. Like, it's not winning any aesthetic awards, but it's fairly straightforward, and it has a low chance of breaking other things.
It's mostly just the repetitiveness, but it's like, otherwise it is like the ideal best solution.
I agree.
That does make me think of one thing that I forgot to write down on this list, which is what's the status of the UI system in GameMaker? It's 2 and 3/4 hours into this, so I don't know how much time you want to dedicate to that. But um,
Okay, how we consider things as it stands in 24.14, we are very happy with the UI layer system that we've got in there. We see that as the way forward. We are going to be providing components through prefabs for that, which will work with that, and that's where we see the UI layers, the UI system. It is reactive. You can set it up. It's flexible. You can create templates within the IDE. You could use those templates. You can add them in. It's composable through that, so that you can put flex panels inside flex panels, and you can compose your UI that way. You can add in sprites. It is stable in that the rules are followed in a easy to predict manner. It is based on a standard technology, so we're not having to educate people on how our flex panels work. It is how flex boxes work on the web. Everybody has access to that. It's a well-known thing. It is how they work. We've not come up with some magic rules that work for our situation. You're not going to have to learn those. It's not necessarily the way that I would make it, but that's not really the point. It's the fact that it's kind of, this is something that you can teach, and it has applicability outside of GameMaker as well. So does that answer the question?
I'm gonna guess probably yes.
I hope so. I still haven't really messed around as much with the UI layers as I would have liked to, because when it first came out, there were some things that just weren't in yet, and then when later betas came out with more features, I just never went back to it.
There is like a project where I am like trying to use them for real, but it's like I haven't touched it in a hot minute because I've been working on, well, library updates.
I think that there are a couple of example projects for the new UI systems, and examples of doing different kinds of menus with them, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it's guys here have remade the whole, remade sections of the IDE using flex panels. We have our own within the IDE. We don't call them flex panels, but we have the same idea. The whole IDE is made that way. And they've also gone to other games like that are fairly heavy on the UI side of things, with a World of Warcraft, and remade things from kind of World of Warcraft screens and things like that using flex panels. So we're quite happy with where things are. We think that they will actually they support all the things that we set out to support to start off with. You may disagree, you may not like flex panels, etc., but they are the way in which the industry it's kind of doing these things. So
yeah, I sort of figured at some point I'll like look at other games, like try to recreate the Minecraft UI or something using flex panels or something like that, and figure it out that way.
And you can do all these things. It's actually relatively simple. You've got to get your head around this idea that you can make template components. So like you don't have to think about. So you can create a table, and say you're wanting to do a scrolling list of things, and so you can create your table and have your UI for the outer parts, and then the list components. You can use a UI layer, which is not visible, but actually can be used as the template component for a single line within that list. And then you could use the IDE stuff to actually create all the different components of that. This is where the description goes. This is where the icon goes. Use placeholders for those. read the struct for that one, and then insert that for every single element, and just allow that. It's makes it very composable in terms of how you actually create these things. And then you've got a whole UI. No, there is a UI for creating your UI at that point, and you can leave it to artists to actually make it all look nice, and it can do that.
Long time ago, I thought it would be fun to like create some tool that lets you lay out UI, export it to JSON, and import it into your GameMaker game. And then I kept not doing it because I was lazy. And then this stuff was announced, so I figured I could keep not doing it because this would probably be better anyway.
You tell us if it's better than what you would have made.
Got a matter of using the UI layers and getting used to flex panels.
Yes, and no, it's we've always said that. No, this is iterative. You know, the whole of game development is iterative. It's not perfect, but we're iterating towards it. 2414 brings in a huge section of UX because you can now manipulate things on the canvas of the UI much easier. You can reposition things, and you know, it is just much easier to use. The first time we delivered it in 2413, you know, there were issues. It was kind of our minimum viable thing that would actually get you know, to show where we're going. But these things aren't, no, just set in stone. They're not going. It's kind of GameMaker's a live product that you know, we're constantly iterating on and hopefully making better each time, where it's not turning to rubbish.
Part of my like hesitation to actually use the new UI stuff is that everything that I'm working on is using a UI system that I've like finally gotten working the way that I wanted it to after years and years and years, and now that it's working, I like don't want to mess with it and have to break things and fix them again. But it is pretty obvious that this is what people are going to want to at least attempt to use in the future, so I figure at some point I really should learn how they work.
The way I would eventually like look at it in like your position is that you'd probably have a future project that you would actually work on, and then you'd probably use that as the excuse to work on UI layers or flex panels.
Yeah, probably.
It's another way to look at it, and something I would propose for you is make it so that your stuff can exist inside a flex panel. Okay, so you could actually start using it, the flex panel stuff, and go, I want to have my panel inside there. My components are actually inside there, and you still create them using your JSON stuff and all the rest of it, but you start to use the other things around about that, and you know, then you can mix and match what you're actually going to do.
Yeah, I guess they can coexist to some degree, can't they?
Especially like 14. I know we've had the calculate function that like a measure calculate function that we got for flex panels now. Can't remember the name from the top of my head, but it was requested.
Well, the calculate thing just lays things out for you.
Yeah.
So if you've made a change to your flex panels, it goes, yeah, here, and then you get you get the layout such that you can iterate through that to go and do things yourself. So yeah, because flex panels themselves are just logical. They don't really do anything. That's where the UI layer stuff uses the flex panels to actually display things.
They're basically just a collection of coordinates that the system will arrange or rearrange if it needs to, aren't they?
Yes, that's exactly it. That follows set rules.
You know, as much as I want to go to bed, someone is asking a question about 3D GameMaker again.
Okay.
Oh, fun.
Right, okay, so GameMaker is built on a 3D pipeline. We just happen to use a 2D matrix on it so that it displays in 2D. We are not changing that. We are never going to change that. because you really want to have that full 3D pipeline because it allows you to do so many effects and different tricks, things like that. So we're not changing that. That's not going away. The 3D functionality, in quotes, on the 3D is not disappearing from GameMaker. If anything, we will be expanding on that, making things easier. There's no reason why GameMaker's a 2D engine, but there's no reason why a 3D model can't be displayed inside a 2D engine, because everybody likes a 3D model for front-end work and things like that. We will be expanding the tool set inside there. But this isn't GameMaker's going 3D, so anything like that. It's just that functionality will expand over time.
Okay.
Sounds like a couple of people want a Nordic GameMaker meetup.
Yeah, if I could clone myself to go to all these different things, it'd be great, but I need to get some work done as well. But
There is not enough Rusters in this world.
I am hoping to go to the graphics conference in the Netherlands in November.
For the last New York GameMaker meetup, Marco got lost and he ended up coming in like 2 hours late, and I felt really bad for him because he only got here when people were starting to leave.
Right.
Next time, like, Martin needs like keep you off of directions.
More likely time zone. It's just yeah.
Probably two.
All right, we're coming up on
It's
3
like
hours. Tabular probably should think about sleep at some point. I need to like eat food. Do we want to start wrapping this up?
I was thinking about sleep for the entire hour. In fact, I almost fell asleep at one point.
Let's tie this up then.
All right, we got to do the one final request.
Right, you want me to do the screaming about GameMaker then?
There is a specific note there about someone getting you to scream about GameMaker.
I love how as soon as we announced this was happening, that was like the first thing that like 5 people said.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you want to turn down your headphones or whatever just now? Just.
All right. You know, I'll clear the airspace. I'm just gonna stay silent.
Okay. GameMaker! There you go. Is that loud enough?
I have no idea what that's going to actually sound like on the stream, because I heard your microphone noise gating, but...
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think the future of GameMaker should be pretty fun. I'm resigning myself to my fate of having to redo a lot of old tutorial material, because that's just how things go when technology evolves, but I think it's going to be fun.
Gotta turn it up. Okay, so I guess that means in GameMaker After Dark, we're just gonna have an After Dark. We're just gonna have to turn up Russell like 2,000%.
Yeah, I'll just distort it more on purpose.
Yeah, thanks.
I never said GameMaker's going 3D, so whoever Rodrigo.
So, Rodrigo, the way that I usually explain it to people, because people on the internet just love to argue about this, is that GameMaker is a 2D engine, but it doesn't stop you from doing 3D things.
Yep.
It's 2D first.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
It's one of those things that it's technically true that GameMaker is a 3D engine, but it's not a useful thing to say, because people think certain things when you say that are not reflective of how GameMaker actually is.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. This was fun. We should do this again. We should, I don't know, yearly screaming and then a follow-up with Russell or something like that. I think that would be fun.
Yep.
It would be fun. It was actually nice.
I'm happy to do that.
Well,
yep.
Glad
Keep me posted.
we'll see what happens in the next months and years as GMRT continues to evolve.
Yes. And excuse me, I'm gonna go to sleep. Or as Sid said, I'm just not gonna sleep. Sid said I'm not gonna sleep, so I'm not gonna sleep now.
Yeah, that sounds
sleep.
likely. All right, I will see
No,
you all later.